Solidarity all students.
Solidarity all students.
Throughout the world.
Throughout the world.
This is the rebirth.
This is the rebirth
of the labor movement.
Clarence Thomas, man, you've been around doing this thing for a very long time. You know, going all the way back to the days of the Third World Strike at San Francisco State. What do you think about this movement right now, coming from that background?
Well, it really reminds me a lot of that when you see how diverse it is. That 1968 strike at San Francisco State was about the Black Student Union and the Third World Liberation Front. Asian, Mexican American or Chicano, Latin American, Filipino American. It was a rainbow, if you will, and this grouping that we see here tonight is representative of that. One of the things that really strikes me is that despite the fact that this movement is primarily young people, it's not entirely young people, but they are very much impacted by history, because years ago it would have been longshoremen taking action at the ports, but now it's young people. And that's reflective of a larger issue, and that is most working people today don't belong to a union.
That's real talk.
And that's something that we all need to recognize. And the other thing is, unions used to be the instrumentality by which the working class was able to basically take on capital for economic and social justice.
Okay.
But it's not doing that in the same tradition as it once did. If you look back at the formation of the Great Strike in 1934 involving longshore workers, what did they do? They withheld their labor for several months around the issue of the right to have a hiring home. They took on the shipping companies, and they were very successful. Today, longshoremen are restricted by the contract from taking certain kind of rank and file action that historically longshoremen have done. But it's not just limited to longshoremen, it's the entire labor movement.
Right. Let's hold that thought for 1 second. We're talking with Clarence Thomas. If you're listening on radio, you're watching on video, union member, longtime leader, activist, freedom fighter. You know, a lot of people kept saying the unions aren't behind this, and I've been trying to explain to them that the unions can't officially endorse this because of contracts. But maybe you can explain this, because that seemed like a full-fledged 1% media blitz that they put out there to kind of to take away from the actions that we're seeing here tonight.
Well, yeah, and it also caused some confusion. And let me just say this, Davey, that I'm not speaking for the union. I've been a member of the Longshore ILWU for 26 years. But one of the things that I think has gotten lost in the ILWU's official position regarding its not having sanctioned or supported or endorsed this action, because it hasn't. But one thing that people need to be very clear about, the sanctity of the picket line. Even though this is not a, quote, labor picket line, it's important because this is the community. We live in the community. These are our sons and daughters, friends and neighbors. And I can't help but think what Harry Bridges faced in 1934 when black people were crossing the picket line because blacks were not in significant numbers in the union, and the only way they got a chance to work was as scabs. But Bridges, in his wisdom, went to the black community and appealed to the community to stop being strike breakers and join the picket line in exchange for blacks becoming a part of the union. Could you imagine if black people had not honored that picket picket line, how different things would have been. So for the union to suggest that community picket lines are not sanctioned or recognized by the contract, longshoremen understand what the contract says, but there are 10 guiding principles that tell us that we don't allow the sanctity of the contract to get in the way of crossing picket lines if they present an issue of health and safety, which is exactly what happened today. And so people were thinking that longshoremen were going to cross a community picket line. And that was very, very disturbing. It was very disturbing. So I felt compelled because people were asking, well, Clarence, what does this mean? Are longshoremen going to cross the picket line? And I said, did longshoremen cross the community picket line in 1977, protesting apartheid? Did they cross other community picket lines that had to do with economic and social justice issues? And the answer was absolutely not. So why should this be any different? We need to be very clear about one thing. The ILWU holds a particular level of respect for all working people because it is a union that understands that discrimination is a tool of the bosses. It understands that the cornerstone for prosperity for all workers is a peaceful world where workers can come together and elect people to represent them, to have a voice in the workplace.
Let me ask you this, and I'm glad you clarified that for us. We live in a city, Oakland, that has 30% unemployment, right next door in West Oakland.
Yes.
Right above that, right on the other side of that bridge. We have similar figures in East Oakland.
Yes.
And just in the city in general, it's 17%.
Yes.
People are going, well, why should you shut down the ports? When you have that high of unemployment rate, the question becomes, are those ports, and those companies employing the people that are unemployed?
Well, that's a very appropriate question. You know, today when you watch the news, there was a deliberate effort to show how truckers were disgruntled because they were losing money today.
The same two truckers that they kept showing over and over.
But let me just say this. Why weren't they interviewing Walmart? Why weren't they interviewing Target, some of the customers of the shippers, to get their reaction to this action? Because the reality of it is this. This is not about the Occupy movement stopping truckers. This is about stopping commerce. And so the reality of the situation is this. If you want to challenge capital, it's going to be inconvenient for workers. Ideally, workers should have been involved with this. And it didn't have to be just longshore workers. It could have been all other workers, because the reality of the situation is this. Labor is afraid to take the kind of actions that the Occupied movement are taking, and there was a time when they were not. The sit-in movement did not start with the civil rights movement, it started with the labor movement, and people don't understand that. And
That's
not
true.
only that...
Can you break that down? A lot of people forget that.
Well, the
You're
reason
talking about
why...
Phil Randolph and all those guys.
The reason why they don't know it, Davey, is because it's not taught to them. People don't realize that long before there was the March on Washington, there was the March on Washington movement that started in 1941, led by A. Philip Randolph.
That's right.
And A. Philip Randolph was a Marxist.
That's right.
But a lot of people don't understand that in terms of his political, his ideology. And I say that because labor is about programs that really are socialistic. If we talk about Social Security, how did we get that? We got that from working people. How did we get benefits from the employers? We didn't get that from the employers because they love us. We got that from the employer because we engage in struggle. The point of it is that labor now is intimidated by lawsuits, injunctions, and so that is the reason why we're in the condition that we're in. This particular Occupy movement has created an opening for labor to now begin to say, people are in motion. We need to capitalize on that, and that's the reason that you saw the Occupy Washington, D.C. action going on last week with, I think her name is Mary Kay Henry, the president of the SEIU. She says that labor the working people are in a state of emergency. I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I think most working class people in this country would agree with that. But what do we do about that? Democracy is more than just voting. Democracy is exercising your rights as a citizen.
Well, the other thing too is, how can you really continue to vote if you vote Democrat or Republican and both are beholden to a corporation? Well, and I mean, and that's what I'm seeing at this point. It's like I'm seeing harsh criticism coming from the right, and I'm seeing very harsh criticism coming from the left at this point. And to me, it seems like it's not whether you're left or right now, it's whether you're corporate owned and corporate bought versus are you free and able to build with the people.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, David, because some would say that the Republican Party represents the extreme right and the Democratic Party represents the right, because we haven't seen anything progressive coming from Democrats in a number of years. But one could also say the reason why it has not happened is because the workers have not been in motion to create any demands that speak to the crisis of the working class. So this movement here is not a fringe movement. How could it be? When you look at this gathering, what do we have here tonight? 4,000 or 5,000 people on a Monday night? They're not home watching Monday night football. They're here at the Port of Oakland. Young people understand that they need to do something to change their situation. And they're looking at things that our previous generations have done to win their struggles. There is going to be something that is going to come from this. I mean that there's going to be a larger movement that's going to emerge. I think we're going to see younger people in the labor movement begin to come up with much more bolder approach to challenging capital. This is the time to do it. If not now, when?
That's real talk. We've been talking with Clarence Thomas. Brother, I want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me, Davey D.
And we're going to talk to you soon.
Okay.
Peace.
All right.